So you completed a DISC assessment. You expected just one letter, one straightforward answer. Then you encounter something unexpected. You see a graph that looks nothing like a single label. Some lines rise, while others dip. You realize that you're more than just one letter. You're the other letter, too. Your brain goes quiet for a moment. You find yourself thinking,
Huh?
Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will know why DISC goes far beyond four-letter descriptions and how to spot your own archetype with confidence. If you're new here, you're in the right place. This channel is all about sharing fresh insights and creating meaningful change. In this video, we're exploring DISC archetypes. No, not just the four basic styles you already know, D, I, S, or C, but the deeper patterns that show why people with the same letter styles can behave so differently. Archetypes help us understand how different traits blend together, which ones lead, and which ones follow. Once you understand archetypes, DISC becomes much more than just an assessment result. It becomes a practical and useful tool for mastering personal dynamics. If you have not taken a DISC assessment yet, check the link in the description before continuing this video. If DISC graphs still feel unclear, watch our earlier video on graph interpretation. It will help this make sense faster. Most people meet the DISC language as four words or colors. Dominance, red. Influence, yellow. Steadiness, green. And compliance, blue. Although that is a useful starting point. Yet people rarely live in one corner. Two managers can both test high D, but behave differently under pressure. The one pushes fast and loud, the other quietly with data. That difference comes from the various DISC profile patterns. An archetype is not just a label, it is a pattern. DISC examines each factor individually. D, I, S, and C are scored separately on a scale from 0 to 100. These scores are then plotted on a graph, and the points are connected with lines. The shape formed by these lines reveals a deeper story than any single letter in the DISC system. Here is where archetypes, also called subtypes, come into play. Over time, similar shapes are grouped together to form archetypes. Typically, you'll observe one dominant pattern along with a secondary influence, much like your main voice and a strong accent. These archetypes help us better understand the complexities of human behavior. You might have noticed this in your own work. Some people are high D and high I. Others are high D with very low I and high C. On paper, both include D. However, in reality, they behave differently, decide differently, and are motivated differently. Let us make this practical. Look at which factor is highest above the energy line. After that, notice the second highest above the energy line. Then, identify the lowest factor on the graph. And watch how steep the lines move between them. You do not need to memorize every shape today. You need to train your eye to notice patterns. The DISC model identifies 12 core subtypes based on two-letter combinations such as DI, SC, or CD. These come from the primary DISC factor, also known as the most dominant factor, and the secondary factor, or known as the second most dominant styles on the graph. That is how we arrive at the different archetypes discussed in this series. Each one reflects a distinct mix of motivation, pace, and focus. Now that you have a good grasp of your DISC profile, let's explore some of the most common archetypes and what makes them special, especially those related to the D style. If the D factor is the dominant factor, with no clear secondary influence, you are the developer archetype. You are recognized as a self-reliant and future-oriented individual You think like an entrepreneur and are always seeking new opportunities. You set high standards and move forward confidently. However, people's concerns may take a back seat to progress. If the D factor and I factor are equally dominant, then you are the inspirational archetype. You initiate action and draw people toward a clear result. You influence through energy and persuasion. You enjoy momentum and visible progress. However, at times, others may feel useful rather than genuinely included. If the D factor is primary and the I factor is secondary, you are the results-oriented persuader archetype. You are known for acting with confidence and moving quickly toward outcomes. You speak directly and expect results. You think fast and decide fast. However, under pressure, your patience and empathy can fade. If the D factor is your primary influence, with the S factor as a secondary, then you are the achiever archetype. You dedicate yourself fully to goals and maintain focus until they are achieved. You work steadily and dependably. You value follow-through and effort. However, delegating tasks and adapting to group priorities may feel uncomfortable. If the D factor is the primary factor and the C factor is secondary, you are the creative implementer archetype. You combine drive with precision. You want results done right, not just done fast. You push for high standards and thoughtful execution. However, others may experience you as reserved or emotionally distant. The final archetype is the ambivalent thinker archetype. If the D factor and the C factor pull exactly opposite directions, this might be your behavioral archetype. This is also known as the DC conflict. These individuals balance logic with action, or sociability, reflecting internal conflict between data and emotion. You can make sound decisions in uncertain situations. You rely on facts and validation. However, when pressure increases, you may hesitate or delay action while weighing your options. Now that you understand the archetypes associated with the D style, let's examine some of the most common archetypes related to the I style. If the I factor is the dominant factor, with no clear secondary factor influence, then you are the promoter archetype. You are characterized as an outgoing, optimistic, and expressive person. You build wide networks and generate excitement around ideas. You communicate with ease and enthusiasm. However, structure, follow-through, and time management can be challenging. If the I factor and the D factor on the graph are equally strong, then you are the inspirational archetype. You bring energy, pace, and persuasion into every interaction. You initiate action and guide people towards clear outcomes. You charm easily and influence through confidence. However, at times, others may experience you as emotionally distant or feel driven rather than included. If the I factor is primary and the D factor is secondary, then you are the persuader archetype. You work through people to achieve results. You enjoy challenge, variety, and movement. You connect quickly and sell ideas with enthusiasm. However, under pressure, you may oversell or become swayed by stronger personalities. If the I factor is primary, with the S factor as secondary, then you might be the counselor archetype. You balance warmth with steadiness. You care deeply about people and relationships. You listen well and solve people's problems with empathy. However, you may tolerate low performance for too long and lose focus on the task. The final archetype is the appraiser, in which the I factor is primary and the C factor is secondary. You persuade through logic, as well as enthusiasm. You explain the why before asking for action. You plan carefully and think critically. However, you may come across as competitive or demanding if standards are not met. Now that you understand the archetypes related to the I style, let's examine some of the most common archetypes associated with the S style. If the S factor is the dominant factor, with no clear secondary influence, then you are regarded as a supporter archetype. You are perceived as consistent, patient, and team-oriented. You work well within clear direction and prefer harmony. You build trust through reliability. However, you avoid conflict. If the S factor is the primary factor, with the I factor as secondary, then you are the agent archetype. You blend patience, sociability, and cooperation. You support both people and tasks with care. You are empathetic, responsive, and willing to help. You organize work well and follow through. However, at times you may tolerate too much and retreat from conflict. If the S factor is the dominant factor, with the C factor being the secondary factor, then you are the perfectionist archetype. If this applies to you, then you value stability, accuracy, and clear procedures. You think systematically and carefully work through details. You take pride in doing things correctly. However, you can get stuck in the details and may progress slowly. If the S factor is the primary dominant factor, with the D factor as secondary, then you are the achiever archetype. You demonstrate a strong commitment to personal goals and outcomes. You work diligently and remain focused until tasks are completed. You become a dependable doer. However, delegating and aligning with group goals can be challenging. Lastly, if the S factor is primary, with the C and D factors influencing, then you belong to the investigator archetype. You are analytical, persistent, and tenacious. You prefer to work independently on complex or technical tasks. You have the ability to remain focused for long periods. However, you may need to develop more visible enthusiasm and greater awareness of people. Now that you understand the archetypes associated with the S style, let's examine some of the most common archetypes linked to the C style. If the C factor is the dominant factor on the graph, with no clear secondary influences, then you are the objective thinker archetype. You depend on data, logic, and analysis. You think critically and prioritize quality over speed. You favor careful involvement with groups. However, overthinking can sometimes make you feel hesitant or more cautious than usual. If the C factor is primary with the D factor as secondary, then you might be the creative implementer. You blend logic with determination. You strive for accomplishment and high standards. You push for results while staying thoughtful and controlled. However, others may experience you as cool, reserved, or emotionally distant. If the C factor is primary and the I factor is a secondary factor, you are the appraiser archetype. You influence through reasoning rather than emotion. You explain the rationale and use structured plans to gain support. You are competitive and assertive when standards matter. You balance persuasion with critical thinking. If the C factor is primary, with the S factor as a strong secondary influence, then you are the perfectionist archetype. You combine precision with steadiness. You follow procedures closely and value accuracy in both work and decisions. You are systematic and conscientious. However, you can slow progress by becoming overly focused on details. And finally, if the C factor is the primary factor, with the S factor and the I factor as a secondary influencing factor, then you are the practitioner archetype. You focus on quality control and high personal standards. You build amicable working relationships while resolving complex people issues. You choose apply technical skill with care. However, you might place high expectations on yourself and others. If this feels like a lot, here is the shortcut. Start with the 4 factors. Focus on the top 2. Pay attention to the lowest. And notice what shows up under stress. Stress often exaggerates the archetype. High D pushes harder. High S withdraws. High C questions details. And the high I seeks reassurance. Understanding which archetype dominates our personality can help us identify what is really important to us. This insight can sharpen our focus and help us reach our goals. When we understand the archetypes within ourselves and others, it becomes easier to see why people act the way they do. Recognizing these patterns can lead to positive, win-win solutions. DISC isn't about boxing people in. It is about giving you better language for what you already sense. The archetypes help highlight the patterns you notice every day, making things more understandable and approachable. If this video is helpful, share it with someone who works with others. Subscribe for more training on DISC, coaching, and workplace behavior.